This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Aaron Matte. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We turn now to Iraq as the U.S. continues airstrikes in the north for a fifth day. A political crisis is escalating in Baghdad. On Monday, Iraq's president named a new U.S.-backed prime minister to end Nouri al-Maliki's 8-year rule. Speaking from his vacation in Martha's Vineyard, President Obama praised the developments.
Today, Iraq took a promising step forward in this critical effort. Last month, the Iraqi people named a new president. Today, President Massoum named a new prime minister designate, Dr. Haider al-Abadi. Under the Iraqi constitution, this is an important step towards forming a new government that can unite Iraq's different communities. Earlier today, Vice President Biden and I called Dr. Abadi to congratulate him and to urge him to form a new cabinet as quickly as possible, one that's inclusive of all Iraqis and one that represents all Iraqis.
According to a report in the Daily Beast, the U.S. has been pushing behind the scenes for Haider al-Abadi to become the new prime minister to replace Maliki. Under Iraq's constitution, al-Abadi now has 30 days to form a new government. During that time, Maliki remains caretaker prime minister, but he appears to be refusing to step down. On Monday, Maliki accused Iraq's president of staging a coup and deployed militias and special forces on the streets of Baghdad.
I tell all the fighters on the front lines, the volunteers and members of the armed forces, including the police and the army, who are worried about the violation of the Constitution and the attempt to circumvent it, to stay in your position and not to worry or be shaken by this constitutional violation. You are engaged in a sacred battle, and we are with you and behind you. So do not lose heart nor fall into despair, for you must win. I call on you to stay put and not to worry, because we will fix this mistake.
The political crisis is escalating as the U.S. bombing campaign enters a fifth day in northern Iraq. U.S. officials have confirmed the CIA has been secretly sending arms and ammunition directly to Kurdish forces known as the Peshmerga. President Obama authorized the strikes last week in what he called an effort to halt the militants' advance on Erbil, where the U.S. has a consulate and military personnel, as well as to prevent a massacre of the Yazidi minority.
To talk more about Iraq, we're joined here in New York by Spencer Ackerman, national security editor at The Guardian. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Spencer.
Thanks for having me.
So talk about the political crisis that's now taking place in Iraq.
So this prime minister is going to be the one, right? Because for the past 13 years or so, we've seen the U.S. set up a governing council of hand-picked Iraqis to be the sovereign leadership of Iraq under U.S. occupation, then settle on Iyad Allawi. When Iyad Allawi seemed like he wasn't working out for the U.S., it settled on Ibrahim Joffrey. Another year later, when Ibrahim Joffrey wasn't working out, it found this previously unknown guy, Nouri al-Maliki, and now suddenly Maliki, after 8 years of increased authoritarianism, overwhelming sectarianism, and really an incredibly heavy-handed attitude, along with some sort of nebulous ties both to Iran and to the United States, isn't working out either, and now, shockingly, isn't leaving power. It doesn't look like the U.S. So much is dictating events as is being dictated by them. This story that my friend Eli Lake reported in the Daily Beast talks about how the U.S. is looking for alternatives to Maliki for quite some time. Abadi seems to have been someone that both they and others within the Shiite bloc coalesced around. The interesting question is, to what degree did Iran engineer the elevation of Abadi? And who knows what happens in 30 days.
What do you mean, to what degree did Iran also elevate him?
Well, Iran has a tremendous amount of influence over Iraqi Shiite politics. It would be interesting to find out the degree to which Iran views him as either its man or a consensus candidate that can back, or someone it just sees as a strong horse.
So Iran's man is the U.S. man?
It can be. I mean, for a long time, Iran's man by default and the U.S.'s man by default was Maliki. This has been a trend in Iraq for quite some time. The U.S. has been kind of confused about how it ultimately can keep Iraq from sort of reverting by default to a pro-Iranian foreign policy, even while it maintains its ties to the United States.
What's your sense of what Maliki is doing here? Is he trying to cling to power, or is he just seeking to arrange a better exit term for his departure?
I don't really want to judge things 5,000 miles away from where I can see them, but it doesn't really look like he's interested in anything other than staying in power, even to the bitter end.
Talk about the role that the U.S. is playing now, what exactly President Obama is doing. I wanted to turn to a clip of President Obama. Let's go back to President Obama emphasizing his claim that the U.S. is launching airstrikes mainly to protect American personnel in Erbil. We'll go to that clip in a minute, but talk about how Maliki's role in Baghdad has affected the situation in northern Iraq and the growth of ISIS, the Islamic State.
Well, so look at where the bombing campaign is happening and look where it's not happening. It's all happening with basically two exceptions. Outside of Erbil, the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan, the semi-autonomous region that's incredibly sympathetic, welcoming, and solicitous of the United States. The two exceptions are ISIS positions besieging Yazidis, tens of thousands of them starving, dying of thirst atop Sinjar Mountain. Where it's not happening is in Baghdad. Where it's not happening is around Baghdad. Where it's not happening is where many Iraqis fear ISIS is infiltrating, acting less like the army that we've seen over the last 12, 13 weeks, and more like a terrorist organization. There's been sporadic bombings in Baghdad. Every now and then, I think yesterday, there was another ISIS announcement that the battle for Baghdad has begun, and many are watching, whether in Baghdad, whether in Erbil, whether in Washington, whether in foreign capitals, when, if at all, ISIS is going to make a push into Baghdad. What ISIS has not faced since its campaign began in Iraq has been a concerted opposition, someone that checks them, that attempts to hold territory, even take territory, especially take territory back, basically act as a force to challenge ISIS. ISIS has basically had the run of the place since two divisions of the Iraqi armed services decided to retreat from Mosul. The reason why the bombing is taking place in Erbil is only pretextually about protecting U.S. citizens, U.S. special advisors, a lot of representatives of oil concerns and so forth in Iraqi Kurdistan. It's to make sure that Kurdistan doesn't fall. It's to make sure that Erbil does not become the next battleground for ISIS, for Kurdish forces that it feels it has to rely on. One of the reasons it has to rely on them is if Baghdad should fall, if something should happen to Baghdad, if Baghdad should be overrun by ISIS or ultimately the Green Zone not be defensible, the U.S. will have to extricate its forces, its diplomats, its special operations advisor personnel, its other Defense Department personnel from the embassy, and the only place to stage that is going to be in Erbil to get them then out of the country. They need to keep Erbil, and that's why the overwhelming amount of airstrikes have focused around those positions. And
toward this end, they're also now arming the Kurds.
That's right. So there are two tracks by which this is happening. One is primarily one that the CIA is in charge of, which is a direct arming campaign. I'm told these are small arms, AK-47s that aren't in U.S. military stocks, ammunition for them. Not at this point talking about missiles, talking about armored vehicles, talking about helicopters, things like that. That raises the big question of to what degree the Kurdish Peshmerga, the irregulars, the militias, can overcome a deficit of force against a much better armed ISIS. And also there's a second track by which the U.S. military is trying to help the Iraqi government conduct more airdrops to resupply the Kurds with their own armaments, some of which come from the United States. The U.S. military started talking yesterday about expediting that, seeing what they can do to support it.
I want to talk about CIA arming the Kurds more in a minute, but the issue of ISIS gaining power because of the U.S.'s man in Baghdad. The U.S. has given tens of billions of dollars to the Maliki government, or in weapons and other forms. And the role the Maliki government has played in the isolation of Sunnis who might not support ISIS, except because of Maliki's policies.
This is a guy who among the first things he did within hours of the U.S. withdrawal in 2011 was arrest the leading Sunni politician, or order the arrest. He ended up having to flee. He started a campaign of harassment, detentions, arrests of Sunni forces, ex-insurgents who flip sides to work with the United States, and by default, the Maliki government. Every opportunity that he had to sort of take steps to include the Sunni Sunni Iraqis in power, he opted against. That, to a great degree, facilitated the rise of ISIS's entry into Iraq, gave a base of support for ISIS. ISIS, from everything that I've been able to glean, And, lots of sources on this who are not on the ground. It's kind of a crapshoot in figuring out exactly what's going on with ISIS, but talk about ISIS as less of a concerted group, as rather a coalition, including a lot of Sunni organizations that feel compelled to bandwagon with them. The question that everyone's had has been, to what degree is ISIS going to, as its previous incarnation, al-Qaeda in Iraq did, overplay its hand? What degree will its brutality eventually force this coalition to cleave, or will that require some kind of exogenous event? The Obama administration seems to think that exogenous event will be an inclusive Iraqi government. What inclusive Iraqi government has there ever been? What inclusive Iraqi government has the U.S. ever shown any facility in being able to forge? It's an enormous open question. Was Maliki the way he was because Iraq is the way it is, or is Iraq the way it is because Maliki is the way he was?
We're going to break, then come back to this discussion. Spencer Ackerman is with us, national security editor at The Guardian, part of the Pulitzer Prize-winning team that did the pieces on Edward Snowden's revelations. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we'll also go to northern Iraq to speak with Joe Stork of Human Rights Watch, who's met with Yazidis. Stay with us.